Welcome to episode 16 of Feeling Through Live. I am joined today by Peter Slayton, who is a writer for Forbes.com, a business owner that he's going to tell us all about what his company does in just a moment. And Peter, I'm so happy to have you here today.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, and a little jealous. I love LA, so here I'm in New York. I'm one of those rare New Yorkers who loves LA.
Well, Peter, I told you, when travel is something that we're doing again, you have an open invitation to come visit me. I'm actually waiting for that.
All right, look forward to it.
So with that said, why don't we start off? Why don't you tell everyone what the Slayton Group is and what you do?
Okay, thank you, Doug. The Slayton Group is a company I started about 5 or 6 years ago, based on my experience, my long experience as a journalist and writer and traveler, as a blind person, traveling around the country and here in New York City, and having had many very uncomfortable experiences in a service environment where someone in customer service really didn't know what to do with a blind guy. How do you handle this person? How do we make him comfortable, or how do I get away from him as fast as possible so I don't have to deal with it? So I concluded that there needed to be some training and education brought forth into this space to help people who are working in service or in other environments, but are suddenly confronted with or interacting with someone with a disability, not just a blind or visually impaired person, but someone, whether they have a physical disability, wheelchair use, or they're deaf or hard of hearing, or they are neurodiverse, to kind of change the dynamic in that so that people feel comfortable on both sides of the equation, so that people with disabilities can get equivalent service to what everyone else gets, to what non-disabled people expect. So that's what we do. And we go to, most of our business has been in hotels. I'm sure most of you remember there used to be this thing called a hotel. Kind of rare these days, but come back. But we also work with attractions, with businesses. To diversify, I created an e-learning program that has the same lessons as my in-person workshops. And we distribute that so it can be run across a platform, an entire company, an entire management platform, what have you. So for example, that's in use at the Sacramento County Airport Authority. I developed that with a colleague who's an expert in instructional design, really amazing man. We made an amazing product. We also distribute that through the American Hotel and Lodging Educational Institute. So it's been adopted by a number of management companies that manage, say, 60, 70, 80 hotels. And so we're really happy with that. And what else can I tell you?
So, obviously there's a ton to talk about in there, particularly given the current context of, like you said, how much the hospitality business as a whole has been affected by, coronavirus and what's been happening over the last number of months, but also through the lens of the recent 30th anniversary of the ADA, and I know you're certainly an expert in that. So why don't we, I'd love to just kind of start to go into some of the elements of that, and something that I've become a lot more familiar with over this last month, where we've had the opportunity to talk a lot about the ADA with a number of different people.
Yes.
As we've just celebrated the 30th anniversary on the 26th of this month, I know that like a really integral aspect of the ADA is the advocacy element, and for people, kind of.
Is what?
The advocacy component of
advocacy, yes.
And having people really having there be a legislation that supports people speaking up and pointing out when there is a lack of accessibility that, again, needs to adhere to the guidelines of the ADA. So I guess but the question from that is, I guess from, when you got started with your business, like how many other businesses did you know about that were working in that space, or really like specifically in the lane that you find yourself in?
That's a great question. And frankly, I knew of only one at that time. in that business, it's a nonprofit, and they have focused more on airports, airplanes, airline travel, and they do some work with Amtrak as well. They're based in Chicago, called Open Doors Organization. They do a good job. As I said, they're a nonprofit. I decided to become a for-profit for the simple reason that people with disabilities pay for whatever they receive in the hospitality environment. And I think it's really critical to the transition that the ADA is helping to promote to a world where we're all really equal in the world, that we stop thinking of disability in charitable terms and in philanthropic terms and what I like to call, no offense to little old blue-haired ladies, but little old blue-haired lady terms from, the 20th century with volunteers and, all that's important, and there's still a great need for it. But I think this is part of a transition that says we need to think about the business and the enterprise power of people with disabilities.
I love that because, again, the way in which you point that out, I think the Great Equalizer, when you're talking at least about, particularly larger scale organizations accommodating, is like the bottom line, right? And like the financial return on it. So even if you're not per se
Right.
someone who cares so much about making things equal for other people, which would be a nice thing to be implicit, right? There is a lot of money to be made accommodating the disability community. Is that correct?
That is correct. And, it's, this is a challenging point, and it's been a challenge since I began this business, and it's really changed a lot in those years. And you'll pardon, I am on the Upper West Side of New York on Upper Broadway, and, they're not coming to get me, but there's a hospital nearby, and so you'll hear some sirens. Sorry about that.
We don't mind sound effects. That's totally fine.
I hope they're not coming to get me.
No,
they could be closing in as we speak.
I guess we're about to find. You better hurry up, Peter, before they do get you.
Yes, let me talk fast. So here's the challenge. It's a chicken and egg thing, meaning I would go to hotels and say, you need this kind of training because you're going to be seeing more and more people with disabilities come to your facility. And they'd say, oh no, we never see anyone with a disability and people don't come. And I'd have to say, well, that's because they're not the world is not yet accustomed to receiving people with disabilities. The ADA, now it's 30 years old. Now there are facilities that are open and available to wheelchair users and all kinds of people with all kinds of disabilities, but it wasn't a mandate before. No one had to do anything. And if you were born with a disability, you got a memo that said, please stay at home and don't bother us, or let us put you in this institution or that institution. So there was, there's the tension between how many people are you serving, how many people can you serve? And if you don't make it easy or welcoming, fewer people will come. And if you make it welcoming, well, certainly what disability advocates like to call the ADA generation, which would be people like you, Doug, or people born on or around or shortly before or after, certainly after 1990 and the signing of the ADA, have a completely different worldview of what disability is, because they are born into a world and into a country where it's actually a right delivered through the force of legislature. Talk much? It's there. You can't deny it. Whereas before it just didn't exist. So A quick example. The first hotel I trained at was in your neck of the woods. It was the Hyatt Regency La Jolla, uh, also affectionately known as the Toaster. It was designed by Michael Graves. Um, and I remember interviewing the staff, and I asked the general manager, well, how many people with disabilities do you see in your hotel? And he said, we only get one or two a week. I mean, a year. He said, we only get one or two a week, a year. What did I say? I said, that's what he said. We only get a couple a year. Later on, with the manager and other managers not present, I asked the staff, how many people with disabilities do you get? And they said, oh, we get a couple every week, and this was a difference in first the top line and the bottom line of frontline workers. So, the front line saw who was coming in, and the managers were, often behind closed doors and did not see. But that has, just only continued to increase.
Right.
So yeah, there's just more people coming into the world, taking advantage of what the ADA has enabled and empowered, and still fighting old battles, people who are clinging to, or not clinging to, but stuck with, a previous worldview, a prior worldview, when there weren't people with disabilities out and about and visible.
Right. Can you, again, without feeling the need to go into too much detail or share any proprietary information, can you talk about what some of the topics are that you address when you're consulting and training the staff of various hotels or other tourism companies? Like, what are some of the key kind of topics that you cover?
Okay, well, I go about it in a few, I have a spiel. I'm not going to give you this spiel. You don't that. It's, but it's basically, first I make sure people know more about what disability is in the community. I talk about history of disability. I talk about the ADA, but I also talk about what makes this important right now. And, we have, as continue to mention the ADA, but when it was first passed in 1990, it was really directed at physical barriers, physical accessibility. Make doors wide enough for wheelchairs to pass through. Let's create ramps. And that's really what people associate with accessibility. Ramps, wider doors, wheelchairs. But of course, it means a whole bunch of things. So we have physical barriers. Then, by the mid to late 90s, we started to have a digital world that didn't really exist for the mainstream in 1990. And so digital accessibility became a thing that is actually only now really becoming understood by businesses, that if they don't make their websites accessible, then someone who uses a screen reader like me, someone who's print disabled. In other words, you can have severe dyslexia or ADHD or just other reading challenges. If you use a screen reader, you can get around that. But if website isn't screen reader friendly, then I'm not going to understand what's happening. I'm not going to be able to deal with it. So there have been really in the last few years, mounting thousands of lawsuits against companies, government entities, educational institutions, retailers, et cetera, with poor website design, inaccessible website design. So that's the second prong of what I call the three-legged stool of accessibility. You've got your environmental / physical accessibility. You've got your digital accessibility. Well, if you don't have the third leg, you have basically nothing. You need social accessibility. And that we can't legislate. I can't go to the Supreme Court and say, Doug was rude, he didn't know how to speak to me, or he grabbed my arm and started pulling me along instead of letting me be guided by him properly to where I needed to go. Or he started leaning on my wheelchair and patting me on the head, or he screamed at me with my hearing aid. All kinds of dumb behavior that can't be legislated, but it can be trained, and a viewpoint can be reframed. So to me, social accessibility is really the key. And as I say again to my hotel clients, you run a 5-star hotel and you have beautiful accessible rooms, which is basically an oxymoron in the hotel industry, and we can get into that. Or you have a fabulous website, but someone comes in and the staff mistreats them and ignores them, or somehow just says stupid things, or can do something hazardous or dangerous because of their unfamiliarity with disability and their ignorance of really what are the best ways to work with someone, then that's what that patron will remember. So for example, I trained recently, my last hotel client was the Pierre Hotel here in New York, 5-star hotel. And I really felt so great to work at a hotel like that, historic 5-star property where they really wanted to be brought up to date. And they have hundreds of employees because of their banquet facilities. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me to go to a hotel with that kind of reputation and work there. And yet I also worked at hotels like the W South Beach, for the uber hip and well-heeled. And, they want to know too. But I find it's the forward-looking clients that at least want to get ahead and want to lead in the space. And that's true.
So you're referring to these forward-looking clients, but I guess generally speaking, how often do you see, or in your estimation, is it a hotel or another business really earnestly wanting to provide better accommodations versus seemingly going into it more from a quote unquote box checking perspective? How often do you find one or the other?
That's, sadly, unfortunately, it's still the latter. There are really two basic reasons I get hired. The first is forward-looking clients learn about my services and say, yes, that's what we want to be. That defines our approach, service to everybody. The other clients are the clients who get sued and then decide to put the horses back in the barn. And nothing makes me happier than someone calls me before they've been sued.
That's forward thinking for sure.
Yeah, and I will say that really in the 6 to 9 months prior to the arrival of the novel coronavirus, attitudes were changing, and I was very excited about this year, and on the verge of some very good contracts. And stuff happens, right?
Yeah, so, I definitely want to get into that in a moment. Obviously, we can't talk about this category of life without talking about how it's been directly affected by coronavirus. But before that, I'm also curious. Obviously, having had the opportunity to train, a lot of managers and other staff at a lot of different hotels and tourism companies, do you find certain misconceptions common? Do you find are there certain ones that come up a lot, or certain ones that stand out that you encounter a lot during these trainings?
Sure. The biggest one, and it's understandable, and a lot of these are understandable, and you can approach it either with an attitude of, I don't care how understandable it is, you got to know what I need right away. You got to intuit it. And to me, that's not going to help anybody. The biggest obstacle after fear, let's say that fear is really fear of the unknown. Um, that's the biggest obstacle. But there's also the idea that, okay, this person wants to be independent, so I better not help them. And I had someone say to me when I asked for a certain service, he said, basically, I wanted to be guided to a gym and I wanted help getting set up on the equipment because guess what? Workout machines have all touch screens now, and there's no way for a blind person to know where to stop or start, how to turn it up or down, anything. But the manager said, well, we were told you people like to be independent. And I said, yes, we like to be independent until we can't. And the truth is, everyone needs assistance, right? You learn to create podcasts not entirely by yourself, I imagine. You've had help. We all need help from someone at some point, and disability is a place where assistance is needed and desired, but forcing someone to accept assistance, and that's the flip side of people who step back and don't and say, oh, you need to be independent. The flip side is the presumption that you need help. And so, for example, people often tell me where I'm going. When I know where I'm going, they assume I don't know where I'm going, or that there's a curb coming up, and that's why I have a cane or a dog. They try to be very helpful when it's not necessary. And then if you say, thank you, I'm fine, they feel affronted. So it's a very cautious, intricate dance.
Yeah, I understand that. It sounds like for those who might be coming to this topic from a very uneducated or lack of experience standpoint, right, that that runs the risk of vacillating between these two wildly kind of opposite sides of the coin, as if on the one hand it's maybe not thinking to help at all, and then when kind of broaching the subject of how to be of assistance in the appropriate way, maybe overcompensating by quote helping too much, right, when it's not needed. Yes. Or then being told, well, hearing the notion of being independent, then going well, then I won't help at all, without really having the understanding to find that middle ground, if you will. And yeah, please go ahead.
The thing is about disability is just like everybody else. Everybody experiences their disability in a unique and personal way, and that's not trite. I mean, yes, we all have that issue in common, but we all, for example, wheelchair users or people who are deaf or hard of hearing, no one, the number of people, the percentage of people who are profoundly deaf and actually hear nothing at all, and the number of people who are quadriplegics and can only move their mouths or their eyelids, that's very tiny. And same with blindness. People who have no optic nerve and never have and have never seen anything relatively small. So, and the way I experience my eye condition or conditions actually is different than someone else with similar conditions. The rate of progression changes from person to person. So you have to make allowance for these personal, like you call them idiosyncrasies if you want, but also understand, okay, there is this blanket condition of vision impairment, and certain things apply across the board and certain things don't. So the more you're aware, the better off everybody is. And as the world, it is, as I mentioned earlier, a generational thing. And, in a few generations, a lot of these stereotypes and misconceptions, they won't ever vanish entirely, but they will certainly have subsided to some degree. But just as we're seeing now with Black Lives Matter and racial tensions, racial injustice, there's always people who will cling to old and terrible notions of what the way they think things should be, and that's true for disability, uh, just like it is with other other awful social injustices.
Right.
Race, misogyny.
That makes me think a little bit of something else you were mentioning at the top of this part of the discussion. But you mentioned that the something that comes up a lot is fear among people that you're training.
Yes.
Can you open that up a little bit more and kind of speak to that?
With pleasure, because it's funny. Several years ago, really about 6 years ago, to explain what's going on when people meet people with disabilities, people who are unfamiliar with disability, what happens? What happens is, I call it the contagion response. In other words, here comes somebody in a wheelchair or who has some kind of visible developmental or cognitive challenge, or a white cane, whatever. I don't want to catch whatever it is that they've got. That's the contagion response. And now that there's COVID-19, and we know that contagion can kill, right? And actually the contagion response has a legitimate foundation in the history of medicine, when diseases like polio or meningitis or measles, which cause terrible disabilities. And there are those in the disability community who would say, Peter, you just use the word terrible and that's ableism. And I can get back to that. But they cause disabilities and people are afraid of them. And so any disability, that triggers that biological, emotional, evolutionary response that says, keep me away from that. And of course, that comes right up against something else, which is, survivor's guilt, or, feeling fortunate to not have X, Y, or Z condition, and then feeling guilty that you feel fortunate. And it's a whole slew of things. And until people learn to recognize it and process it, and, like recognizing your own unconscious bias, it will persist. There's no way.
I'd love to follow up with a question about actually like the contagion mindset you said there. For a moment, though, I'm just gonna hold for an interpreter switch.
Sure. And I'm gonna take a sip of water.
All right, it's perfect time. Okay, so switching over here. Give me one moment. Patrick, we all set? Excellent. Okay, so continuing here. That's, I find that so fascinating, and I guess I've never really thought about it in that way. And I'm just like wondering, to clarify, when you speak of this kind of like contagion response, do you like literally mean that in some people maybe consciously, and a lot of people perhaps subconsciously, that there's really this feeling that they might literally catch a disability from someone in that way?
I'd say it's almost universally subconscious. It's, and I'd say because, and as I said, it really is rooted in reality, and what used to be that you could catch disability. And now COVID is something you can get. We are seeing it. People get disabled by COVID-19. That we just heard about the lung transplant. And if not being able to breathe isn't a disability, you tell me what is,
Sure.
And there's a flip side to it, though. And this is at the sort of the other end of the spectrum from fear. It's amazement and sometimes a fetishization of disability. It's the I'll tell a quick story. Someone came up to me as I was waiting for the crosstown bus, actually on 96th Street, Doug,
Mm-hmm.
on between just east of Madison Avenue And this woman came up to me and said, "I'm amazed by what you do. I could never do what you do. It's so inspirational." And I said, "Well, first, I beg to differ with you, because I'm sure if you were in this situation, you would learn to cope and you'd be able to do it." And people in the disability community talk about inspiration porn, you know, which my favorite example of inspiration porn is when if you go to, say, a fundraising dinner for any condition, and there's always some kind of video showing a hapless person with a disability, usually a young child who's with treacly music in the background and a sobbing parent. And yet this person somehow managed to, climb Mount Everest or whatever. I just do something, to me, just getting up out of bed for everybody. We all have to get up out of bed, work to feed our families and ourselves, to take care of ourselves. That's inspiration. And so if you say I'm inspiring, I appreciate the thought, but it's also not helpful. It's just it's a burden, because what if I don't feel like being inspirational today? I certainly don't wake up every day and say, I'm going to go inspire some people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something certainly, obviously speaking from like the media storytelling side of things,
right.
That's certainly like a dangerous trope to fall into as a storyteller, including, the disability community, your storytelling is that trope of falling into, the disabled character being there, just like their function being to inspire others and kind of
yes.
only that. And that's certainly something that is often problematic in storytelling, as well as obviously your day-to-day real life experiences.
Yep. And, we've seen a little bit of a shift toward that in that recently. And there's, of course, always the discussion of should all blind parts be played by blind actors? I think that's a really interesting question, because isn't that what acting is? If you're not blind, you learn to be blind, or you learn how blind people behave. And however, I know there are lots of blind actors and dancers and, artists, and why not give them a chance? Why not let them do it because they're ready to go? But it's a worthwhile question. And now I think there are more roles of people with disability where the casting, or not the casting, the writing and directing is more reality based and more aware than it used to be.
Yeah, that certainly is a whole topic in and of itself. But just to that point that you're talking about of like, well, isn't that what acting is, to like take on someone else's experience? And it certainly is. But I think, it's one of those things, just like you're talking about, as far as like, there being plenty of, not in your example, blind actors out there who can play that part. In some seemingly, standing here in this moment, inconceivable world in which every person of any, disability or race or gender or sexual orientation all had the same kind of opportunities as everyone else, then perhaps in that world, sure, that absolutely, because everyone has so many opportunities. Opportunities are so abundant that it doesn't feel like it's taking something away from someone. But in a world where that's so disproportionate, in the sense that some of the numbers that have certainly surfaced again during this talk around ADA 30 being that, and again, I'm not going to get this 100% right, but something to the extent of, I think, anywhere between 20 to 25% of the population, it has a disability of some sort, whether visible or not visible. That I think it's something like only like 3% of characters are portrayed in mainstream like TV and film, and many of which are like a small percentage of those are played by disabled actors. So obviously you can see the disparity there. But yeah, it's an interesting topic, and certainly one that's super relevant to the practices of the industry.
I'm going to give a little plug to someone I know who just started recently, and she just won a great award from the National Federation of the Blind. A woman, an actor named, a blind actor named Marilee Talkington, uh, recently opened the Access Acting Academy. I think it's here in New York City. She won a $25,000 award from the National Federation of the Blind for being great, I guess. Like, for just doing something really positive for blind people. And and her goal is to train blind actors, people who are blind who want to act. I'd like to shift a little bit to back to the pandemic and Contagion, and one reason the Contagion response is so relevant today is, as I mentioned, the pandemic. And one of the things the pandemic has done, and there was a lot of discussion about this in the community early on, is, and I've written about this a couple times on Forbes.com. Basically, it's shown the world what life can be like for a person with a disability. Disability has always involved a lot of isolation. It's not as much as it used to be, but certainly I think in the world of the deaf and hard of hearing, it's endemic. Also in the world of the blind, well, it is everybody who has a disability experiences it, because in a certain way you can be separated from others. You can't hear what people are talking about. You are separated from that conversation. If you can't tell where people are going without assistance, then you're separated from them in that way. And if you can't get there because there are barriers and obstacles, that's also a separation. So isolation has been key, and now suddenly people have found themselves isolating in a way they never expected to do, staying home for long periods, depending on others to bring them their food, to take care of them. They're depending on technology for assistance. They are just getting used to not interacting at the drop of a hat when they wanted to. And I think, and also to really being afraid of catching something and other people stay away from them.
And Peter, just to again, I encourage any of you watching to read Peter's articles on Forbes.com, and we'll make sure we let people. Well, what is I can share a link later, but what is the best way for people to find those articles, if you can tell them?
I have a page on Forbes.com. Search my name and Forbes, and it'll be there. And I can also send you a link to that page.
Great.
So you just search through the articles. Now, what's funny about that page is, years ago, in my previous life, I wrote about commercial real estate and architecture. I was a journalist for many years, and that's what I wrote about. And so I had a column on Forbes, in Forbes, the magazine, and on the news, on the website, writing about real estate investment trusts and, big real estate types. And I think a lot of that is harder to access. I think I published my hate mail from a certain orange cartoon character now in Washington when I wrote something that he didn't like. He sent me some hate mail. I kept it as a proud badge of honor in a really cheap frame. So, yeah.
Sorry to cut you off there, but to that point, there's actually something I'd love to discuss about design. But sure. before I reference that, just on your last point about how COVID has made other people have to kind of learn some of the things that the disability community often experiences, I'd love to just read a quick passage from your article from late April entitled "Disability Will Be Part of the New Normal," and you write that by forcing people all over the U.S. to shelter in place, this virus is introducing America to how so many people with disabilities lived their lives before the passage of the ADA, and so many who still do. People with vision, hearing, mobility, and cognitive challenges to functionality have found themselves living out their days inside walls that they were forbidden, unable, or expected never to leave, stretching back into history. To encounter the disabled out and about was to fear contagion, which I think is just a nice little section there that kind of, in your words in one of your articles, speaks to several of the topics we've been discussing here. And again, I encourage all of you.
I wrote that?
I think so. I mean, at least your name's on it.
Yeah, wow.
But
No,
again, I encourage all of you to read Peter's articles. They're not just informative and interesting, but also certainly not short on a real perspective, point of view, and certainly not short on a wry sense of humor often too, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
But to what you were just talking about, and again to reference another one of your articles, the trouble with accessibility. You ask, during this discussion of like, universal design or accessible design or human-centered design, as you note, are various terms, of in which people are starting to think about how to be more successful. You pose the question, isn't design for everybody? This is a quote. Isn't design for everybody? Isn't design supposed to be accessible? Isn't design by definition human-centered? Yet these labels all highlight something that has been missing: design that allows all to participate, to use, to feel welcomed and empowered under any circumstances, however circumscribed. And I feel like that's such an interesting thing to open up for a moment. And first, can you kind of just explain what like this concept of universal design or these other words are and how it relates to the sentiment that you share in the passage I just read?
Well, that's a big ask, so why not? Universal design, which is, I prefer to say accessible design, but I prefer just to say design, really, but we're not there yet. But basically, it means design that is, by definition, for everybody. Everyone can participate in it. Take advantage of its positives and experience its negatives in similar ways. Everyone can enter and leave. Everyone can enjoy the different levels. Everyone can hear in a space, even if it's crowded. Everyone who wants to hear, everyone can, and not everyone wants to hear. And that's, a beautiful aspect of deaf culture. But everyone who wants to can. Everyone in a wheelchair can maneuver through a space. A blind person can somehow determine there's wayfinding that's set into the floor that helps, or elsewhere that will guide you to where you want to go. That it's intuitive in that sense. And not just designed to look nice, but actually function in a positive and accepting way. And I don't particularly like the word inclusive, if you've read my articles, but
certainly have.
It's just for the
and
benefit of everyone.
I'd love to quote you just once more on that. I'm only gonna speak in quotes from Peter Slayton from now on. But
Me too.
In your article, The Trouble with Inclusion, you write, and I love this, but you write, Groucho Marx got it right when he said he did not want to belong to any club that would have him as a member. I feel much the same way about the inclusion mantra that is being parroted from corporate offices to non-profit stalwarts and piggybacking on the diversity whale like a pilot fish, which I love is such a strong way to start an article about that. But yeah, if you'd like to continue on that note of what you were saying.
Sure. My basic point about inclusion, and I kept hearing this word inclusion, and I kept thinking, well, included by whom? And of course, to be included means at some point you are excluded. Someone's inviting me to this dance, to this game, and I'm here already. And who are you to invite me? And I understand why it has to be that way now. But if you're going to include me, then get out of the way and don't continue to act like the host who has invited me. And I don't think I said this in the article. It's just, okay, if you invite me, then let me in. And then remember, we're all here equally, not that you're the host. And the same, I think there's this, diversity is the same thing. What's diverse from whom? I mean, we all know, but that's the challenge. And it's just there's finally now a push to really take that phrase, that thinking, and say it's not about just populating a company with some good-looking people in various races, etc. It's understanding that that this is the society, and you're not marketing, back to our earlier discussion, to just one kind of person. And that brings in, just for fun, because we haven't had enough to talk about, that brings in ageism, and the concept of old age in this country being a place you put people away, and because you don't have to live with them anymore, and they're a bother. And that's how we're schooled and raised to think of old people. And there is, and I've been speaking about this more recently, and there is a big Venn diagram with the big chunk in it about the confluence of older age and disability, and the same things about isolation and learning technology and independence and dependence and accepting your place, age gracefully, whatever. Don't get pissed off. All of those things apply in ageism. And so it's just a part of the whole fabric that's changing and getting woven in new ways. And older people can work and can add value. Age of retirement is no longer the age of retirement, especially in an economy that's dominated by multi-billionaires keeping most of the money for themselves, and people have to work. It used to be that, feminism was given a boost by the fact of single income households becoming less sustainable in the 70s and 80s. And so families had to be dual income households. Well, now retirement age is no longer something we can rely on and turn to and say, okay, I'm 65 now, I'm going to stop. Pensions have been raided by corporates and are, if we had a pension at all. And so it's just things are different, and so we have to learn to think of all of these things in new ways, whether we want to or not.
Yeah.
I think that's what makes it a really exciting time, despite the really difficult challenges we are living through in this multi-crisis time of a pandemic and a government that's hostile to democracy, frankly, and the rule of law, and an economic disaster and sustainability. Let's just throw in another one just for fun.
But other than that, things are great.
No problem.
But just to talk about the pandemic for a moment here, because some people have asked this, and with we have about 8 or so minutes left in the conversation. I'd love to address this. I'll just read. There have been a couple questions about this, but from Lighthouse Guild. Lighthouse Guild, thanks for joining us today. They ask, and I think it was in relation to our earlier part of the conversation, specifically about the work you do in the hospitality field. how COVID has impacted that, especially when COVID guidelines for safety were not designed for people with vision loss to follow.
I'm sorry, Doug, you're kind of trading again.
Sure. So the Lighthouse Guild asks, how has COVID impacted your work, especially when COVID guidelines for safety were not designed for people with vision loss to follow?
Very, very good question. Hello, Lighthouse Guild. I love you. And I don't know who there, but you would have told me. Well, first of all, it's impacted my business for the simple reason that no one's really looking for training on basic service right now. Everyone wants to train about this question, COVID-19, and how do we prepare to admit once we open up again and really start accepting guests. How do we prepare for that? And that is something that people are asking, starting to ask. Well, they've been asking, but something they can expect to learn from us at the Slayton Group. There are some real basic things. One of the things that happens is has to do with entrances and exits in properties that people are now really trying to limit the number of entry points to buildings, whether they're hotels or office buildings or restaurants or whatever facilities, because that's the only way you can control the flow of people. And so you have to make sure that when you're creating your very small group of entry points, that they all have to be accessible, because people have to be aware of how to get there, in an emergency, and how to exit. It's really critical. So you have to control for that. Distancing. This tends to be a matter of personal preference, but there are people who will say, and I want to be guided from point A to point B. I'm blind. I need to be guided, but I need to stay 6 feet behind you, and you have to just keep talking and tell me where to go. That'll help. But this all plays into one of the basic facts of experiencing hospitality from someone who presumes they know how to help someone. One of the worst things that people do, whether pre-COVID and post-COVID, but it's much less post-COVID, but it still happens, is people just grab me and say, oh, you need to go over there. Here's the chair. And I start pulling me in one direction or other. And not just me, of course, but I've been grabbed and pulled from every part of my body, and it still goes on. So, of course, you don't want anyone to do that, and you want to make sure your staff knows, do not touch someone. Do not. I think it also speaks to, for example, sign language interpretation and also face coverings, the mask hysteria. You need to wear a mask. If we're speaking to a deaf person, deaf people, I'm not going to say a percentage because I don't know it, and actually I think everybody to some extent, we all rely on lip reading to some degree. And of course, deaf people who have learned to do it, been forced to learn to do it, rely on it more. So how do you reveal your face in that instance? And can you? And the answer is yes, you can. You have to stand back, but you want to make sure you're standing under, you're in lighting. Lighting is not behind you, but in front of you, showing you. You can also, one of the great techniques now is if there's difficulty communicating by talking, there's no interpreter and it's loud, et cetera, et cetera. I always tell people, pull out your phone and write a text and show it to the person. Well, now you can send the text to the person, or, you can display that from farther away somehow. So there are coping mechanisms, but it's still a work in progress. And I did see, for example, I saw a law firm that specializes in, it represents companies that are being sued over accessibility issues. They held a webinar, I don't know, a month and a half or so ago about service in the hotel industry during COVID-19. And it was really important. Now, we all know about, lines, saying, lines on the floor, tape on the floor to say, must stay behind this line. And, you got to make sure that you're going to put tape on the floor, say, in front of a checkout desk, so that people know where to stay, how to stay apart. Got to make sure that tape is nice, thick tape, that not just a little thing that might feel like a scrap of paper you brush with your toe. It has to be discernible. And yesterday I went into a local restaurant, and I went to order food at a local restaurant that had just opened up. And, as I approached the door, I didn't know how they had set it up so that I could order. And I didn't think I would be allowed inside. And sure enough, when my chest hit, a rope at chest height that just was like, it's there, don't come beyond here. That was nice and clear. It wasn't like a stiff rope that like caught me and dropped me, but it had a little bit of give, so I didn't fall down or wasn't really surprised. So it's just there's common sense, and then there are real guidelines, but it's really health and safety and cleaning, and masks. And of course, and then there are other people with disabilities, with breathing disabilities, for example, for whom masks are hazardous or dangerous. And that is something you have to be aware of. So if you shout at someone to put their mask on and they can't, and wearing a mask is not possible for them, then you have to be aware of that and permit that. It's not hard, and it's hard and fast when people can safely wear masks, though.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all that and everything else we talked about today. I'd certainly love to keep chatting with you, but we're at time for today, so you'll have to come back and talk to me again sometime, I guess.
I'd love that.
But yeah, thank you.
Go Mets. Sorry.
Sorry?
So let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets. I'm a Yankees fan, so I don't know.
Oh, well,
I don't know if this is going
I'll
to work.
teach you. Invited back.
But no, thank you, Peter, so much for joining us today. Why don't you just remind people, again, if they want to reach you at the Slayton group or read any of your articles, how the best way for people to do that.
I really appreciate that, Doug. Slayton group is slaytongroup.com. That's SLATIN group, like group.com. I'm at peter@slaytongroup.com. My phone, if you want, Doug has it, but it's 917-584-6094. My articles are under on Forbes.com under my name, Peter Slayton. And there's a page there, and you can access most of the articles, or all of the articles I've written since I began writing about disability, and probably you can request some of the older pieces on real estate. But I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to help your organization, if you have one, learn about not just training people in service, but if you need help adjusting your employees, helping your employees include other employees, welcome employees with disabilities. I think that's key. You need help with design, accessible design, and accessible digital design. I don't do either of those things, but I am happy to refer you to people, and I don't refer people for a kickback. I refer people, I always give you a choice, and it's up to you to choose somebody. So I don't like to be like the tour guide who says, yes, this is the best restaurant in town, and I get 20% of whatever your bill is,
Sure.
So I'm happy to refer you to help you out in any of those instances.
Great. Well, thank you so much again, Peter, and thank you to
Doug.
all of you joining us. As always, we'll be back next week, same time, same place, with a new episode of Feeling Through Live. 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time. And until then, have a great weekend and a great week. Thanks so much. Bye.
Great. Keep feeling through, Doug.
You as well, Peter.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.